makes you think what? When you have a mortgage, what do you have to have? Insurance. When you don't have a mortgage, what do you then don't you have to have because nobody's forcing you? Insurance. They kept their insurance. So it's like, oh man, that is so wise. I'm so glad. So
Was anybody home?
they were home and they were able to get out fine, but several of their pets were not able to. And cats, right? And so, and my brother was a roller coaster believer. You know, when things were great, he was wonderful follower of Christ. When things were hard, you know, he would, get caught into drugs and other kind of things, and things of life would pull him aside. And so, but when things were well, he took his whole family to church. And so Shelley and Crystal and them have all made commitments to Christ in their lives. And so it's an up and down, but it's good that, Julie has some pictures from Shelley and all that. And
They said one thing that was pretty miraculous was that like years ago, like 20 years ago, Grant had remodeled the kitchen for Shelley when he was still alive, and he had actually put in a steel door between the garage and the kitchen. And everyone's like, why did you do that? That wasn't necessary, whatever. Well, that was what kept the fire from completely coming into the house so fast that all of the family probably would have died. Honestly. So, I mean, it was, of the Lord that he put that steel door in.
Exactly.
So. She's been texting me.
Welcome to our Bible study in the Gospel of Luke tonight in Renaissance time. So we're going to begin looking at Renaissance art. So if you're interested in art, come out. If you're not interested in art, then come out anyway, and you might get interested. Who knows? I was just looking for my glasses. Oh, there they are. We are in Luke chapter 9, and I want to go back to what we have been looking at the last couple of weeks, because there was something at the end of last week that I didn't have time to do. So we're going to read what's a little bit of a long passage, but beginning with verse 28, look at the transfiguration. I'll try not to comment on it. And we'll read that, and then I want to go to a psalm that came to my mind that I think expresses something of what was experienced there. So verses 28 to 36. Yeah, 28 to 36. Would someone like to read that for us? Okay, Carol.
Now it came to pass about 8 days after these sayings that he took Peter, John, and James and went up on the mountain to pray. As he prayed, the appearance of his face was altered. His robe became white and glistening. And behold, 2 men talked with him, who were Moses and Elijah, who appeared in glory and spoke of his decease, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. But Peter and those with him were heavy with sleep. And when they were fully awake, they saw his glory and the 2 men who stood with him. Then it happened, as they were parting from him, that Peter said to Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here. And let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah, not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were fearful as they entered the cloud. And a voice came out of the cloud saying, This is my beloved Son, hear him. When the voice had ceased, Jesus was found alone, but they kept quiet and told no one in those days any of the things they had seen.
This reminded me of a portion of Psalm 24. I'll begin with verse 7. As we try to picture what it was like for Peter, James, and John to have experienced this. Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is the King of glory? The Lord, strong and mighty, the Lord, mighty in battle. Lift up your heads, O gates, and lift them up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Who is this King of glory? The Lord of hosts, Yahweh Sabaoth. He is the King of glory. Selah. And this, of course, reminded me of a song by Steve Green that I'd like you to enjoy, and it's not available. It was there last week. It was there, let's see, let's watch on YouTube. Hmm.
Rachel will do her rendition of it right now.
Here we go.
Yeah. Beth told me last week that I'll just play it on my phone. I said, no, we'll put it on the screen.
Exactly.
I got it right here.
All right, let's just listen.
He's gonna sign it. Right, almost.
Okay.
Where are we at here? Oh, Chrome update. What do you got?
Steve Green, what's it called, Beth? Medley,
Messiah.
Messiah medley.
Got it right there.
Yep.
You get it?
Mhm.
Let's go.
You don't need my phone.
Showing up over there.
Hit the skip.
There it is.
And the glory of the Lord shall be. Shall sing together, together. As Lord, and the glory of glory for to us a child is born, unto us a son is given, unto us the Son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called. Wonderful Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Glory to God. Glory to God. Rejoice, 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 when King cometh unto thee. Who is sweet the glory? Who is sweet the glory? This King of glory. The Lord strong and mighty, the Lord strong and mighty, the Lord of hosts. Is a King of glory. And he shall reign forever and ever. King of kings, and Lord of lords. He shall reign forever
That may be as close as we can get to what Peter, James, and John.
Okay.
That's not for you, John.
Thank you for that.
That's right. There we go. Look at that thing, it actually came on there. It's weird.
Yeah,
I don't know, maybe it was something
I
with
played
Chrome.
yesterday at home, and I think we tried it last week.
Okay, I might do it here now.
We can, yeah, just right there, that's fine.
Gotta figure out.
Let's just sit down.
Yes. I think we'll be singing that, I think, in eternity. All right, so this great experience on the Mount of Transfiguration, and then we come to verse 37 the next day. This from verses 37 through 62, we have a series of events that clearly illustrate the disciples' lack of spiritual understanding and things that need serious correction. And this is what's coming up. First, the demonized boy, then the prophecy of Jesus' death, then the fight over who's the greatest, then jealousy over other exorcists, then the anger of the apostles, and then mixed loyalties. And I'll try to remind you where we are as we go along. Hopefully, we will cover the first one. I'm always hopeful that we get further than we do. So who knows? All right, so here we are in verse 37, beginning of the part called that we'll call demon possession. This section is going to have 3 DPs. First is demon possession. On the next day, when they came down from the mountain, a large crowd met him. So the next day is an indication that the transfiguration had taken place on the preceding night, most likely. And one is reminded of Moses descending from Mount Sinai. I think we can make a lot of those connections. We think of Jesus coming down from this mountain, and Moses was there, so that causes us to think about Moses being on the mountain. And when he came down from the mountain with the tables of stone, and what did he discover when he got to the base of the mountain? Yeah, complete chaos and disorder, right? Complete disobedience. And Jesus comes down to the base of the mountain, and he finds a large crowd there, not acting as the children of Israel had been, but we'll find out what occurs here. Verse 38, and a man from the crowd shouted, saying, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son." Now, this word "to look at" is a word that's used in a common language to mean to look with pity upon something. Although it is also a compound verb that's common in medical writers for examining carefully the patient. So this man's crying out for Jesus, not just to look at, but maybe even look upon would be a better way of saying it. To examine maybe would even be better, to examine his son. And then what's the explanation he gives for that? For he's my only boy is supplied in a New American Standard. My only, literally says he's my only. My only. It's that word mono. Whoops, it separated the S from the Latin. Didn't notice that before. Monogenes moi. The S belongs with the monogene. Monogenes moi, my only. This term is used only in Luke. And we've already seen it several times. We've seen it concerning the only child in Luke 7, and then also in Luke 8. And now here in Luke 9, we find an only child once again. And we can't help but think of Jesus as being the only son as well. So it's his only son. That makes it all the more important, especially in that culture. If you lost one son, as long as you had another one, you didn't feel so badly, I guess. But it's your only son. That's your last hope for any future of your family and for someone to take care of you. All right, then we're told that a spirit seizes him and he suddenly screams. This word suddenly is only in Luke's writings, except for one other place. And again, it's a medical term used by doctors describing sudden attacks of disease, like epilepsy. Suddenly, he screams. Now, the word screams here is an onomatopoeia, and I don't know whether I'll do it justice or not, but the word is kratzo. Kratzo. It's used of the cry of a raven. Kratzo. And so that's the word it's used here, that when a demon possesses him, he screams, he cries out like a crow or a raven, and we're told that it throws him into a convulsion with foaming at the mouth. Areteus, a physician of Luke's time, in treating of epilepsy, admits the possibility, because that's what it looks like here. It looks like epilepsy, but he admits of the possibility of its being produced by demonical agency. Epilepsy was called by physicians the sacred disease. So even non-Christian physicians recognized that sometimes there was a supernatural element to it. So it throws them into a convulsion with foaming. New American Standard supplies at the mouth, just so it's more clear. There would be foaming anywhere else. And again, the use of with foam, literally, is a medical term. Although to us, it certainly appears simply to be a case of epilepsy, and many people have pointed to cases like this in the Gospels especially, and say, see, these ignorant people didn't know the difference between epilepsy and supernatural. They attributed everything to supernatural. So Jesus really doesn't know what he's talking about either. But in reality, Luke, the physician, is able to differentiate between true physical epilepsy and a demonically induced epileptic convulsion. We give him credit for being able to do that. And we're told that it's, I was going to tell you, that's the word with foam, just in case you're keeping track. Then we're told only with difficulty does it leave him. So apparently the spirit comes and goes, or at least releases its hold on him. But even when he is releasing control, it says he mauls him as he leaves. He mauls him, he breaks him up. This is a common verb for rubbing something together and crushing, like chains or a vase. So it leaves him completely weak. The Christian Standard Version translates it this way: wounding him, it hardly ever leaves him. Kind of reverses it. Now, one of the perplexing connections in the New Testament is that between grand mal seizures of epilepsy and demonic possession. And I certainly would not want to say that every epileptic fit is demonic in origin. And I don't think Luke would either. And the fact of the matter is that whenever we see these seizures occur in the New Testament, it is always because of a demon. That doesn't mean that every epileptic seizure in that time was demonic. It's just those are what's recorded. You follow me? So the Bible's not telling us that every seizure is demonic. It's just saying that there were times when it was, and those are times when Jesus and then after him, his disciples were able to cast out that demon. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions or comments to this point?
Yeah, I think it's helpful. It's listed often. Jesus said they have a whole line of people. We'd be healing for hours, whatever. And there'd be all these people came from all around and he healed all their disease and did all these things. We're only given these handful of
Mhm.
instances of the hundreds and thousands of healing miracles that Jesus did.
Right.
So it makes a lot of sense when you think of it that way.
And there could have been people healed of epilepsy
Exactly,
that were not demonic.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
there's a good chance.
I just think of my boys, and every time when they were young, they would focus on the horrible thing that was happening and miss the great big point. Like in the story or something, the snake or boy, here, I don't think the disease is the focus of this. I
Mhm.
think the next line is the focus
Right.
of this whole thing.
Right. I just want to make sure we're clear on not necessarily equating the two. All right, next we come to what's called disciple perversion. In verse 40, the man says, I begged your disciples to cast it out, and they could not. That's why I'm coming to you, Jesus. I tried your disciples, they couldn't do it. Now, when you read that, what do you think? Doesn't the question arise, why couldn't they? Why would you expect that they would be able to cast out this demon?
He told them that they could do that in previous verses.
Yeah, back in the beginning of the chapter, remember? When he sent them out with the ability to not only heal diseases, but to cast out demons. So we might expect that they would be able to do this. But they weren't. Now, there are a couple possibilities as to why that would be the case. It may be that Jesus had given them special enablement for their previous missionary journey that didn't carry over. That's certainly a possibility. Or is it, as some believe, that the disciples had been given the ability to cast out demons, but failed to exercise their gifts properly? Although I try to stay in the Gospel of Luke, if we glance over at the other accounts, we see that Jesus gives us some reasons why. In one account, it says it was because of a lack of faith, and another account is because of a lack of prayer. So that would lead me to believe that they would have had the ability to do it. They just didn't proceed in the correct way, in the correct manner. Dr. Darrell Bach opines, when we fail, it is because we have not used what God has made available. That certainly is a lesson for us, understanding that the disciples did have the ability, and consider that when we fail, it's not because of a lack of ability. And I'm not talking about failing at casting out demons or failing at healing or any of those things. I'm talking about the failures in our own lives of things we know of what we should do or shouldn't do, and we fail. It's not because of a lack of ability as Christians, it's because of a lack of using what God's made available. And you think about coming down, for Peter, James, and John coming down from the mountain and then encountering this. Isn't that just the way it is? You have a great mountaintop experience. And what do you get when you come down?
Yeah.
Trouble. Trouble right here in River City. And that starts with T and it rhymes with P, and that stands for pool. Yeah, you got trouble. Well, they came down from the mountaintop and they had trouble. You can imagine what Peter wanted to say. Let's go back up the mountain. But Jesus speaks in verse 41. He answered and said, you unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you and put up with you? Kind of strong words. And as I looked at that, before even trying to understand what he meant by unbelieving and perverted generation, I thought, I need to know to whom he's speaking. Who's he saying these things? Well, there are several possibilities. One, he's talking to the disciples that are gathered there. Secondly, he could be talking to the scribes, which are present in Mark's gospel. But then again, that wouldn't fit here because he's saying the words and the scribes aren't mentioned. Could be talking to the Father, but the Father in another gospel says, I believe, help my unbelief. That doesn't seem appropriate. It could be talking to people in general. But as I examined this invective, I thought that no way could it refer to his beloved disciples, could it? And John is shaking his head, yes. It's difficult to imagine that it is the disciples with whom he is upset to this degree, and yet they were the ones who could not cast out the demon. And according to the Gospels, due to a lack of prayer, lack of faith. As R.C. Sproul contends, in this attempt at healing the young boy, they acted without faith, and they participated in the perversity of that generation. Let's look at the word. We know what the word unbelieving, without faith. The word perverted might need a little bit of explanation. Are there other words used in your translations? I didn't look at all the translations.
Faithless and twisted generation.
Twisted, yeah. Twisted is a good word. Perverse, perverted, distorted. Those are good terms. Now, when something is distorted or twisted, what does that mean exactly?
They're thinking that they weren't thinking clearly. They had the power, and they just, I was thinking that maybe this, that they might have known it was a demon possession, and it frightened them. That's why they didn't have enough oomph
Mm-hmm.
to do it, because they got frightened, and that would be why Jesus would get angry with them. You have the power.
Yeah.
Use it.
Yeah. When something's twisted, usually it's something with you've got the right idea about something, but then it's turned, it's twisted. You know, think about when I taught Understanding the Times in high school for the high school students, one of the questions that I would ask is evil the opposite of good? And most people would say yes. And I would say, no, it's not. Evil's not the opposite of good. It's a perversion of the good. Because if it's the opposite of good, as long as you've had good, you would have had to have had evil. And yet God was good and there was no evil. You follow? And so perversion, twisting is turning things in a direction in which they should not be turned. And that's what Jesus compares a lack of faith, of not believing, not trusting in God, let's just put it in a general sense, leads to perversion. It creates in our thought processes something which is twisted. We're not thinking the correct way. It's crooked. And I wonder if this is not an allusion to what Moses recorded in Deuteronomy 32. Just listen carefully. I'm just going to read a couple verses. Verse 5 of chapter 32, Moses says this: his people have acted corruptly toward him. This is their defect. They are not his children, but a devious and crooked generation. And then later in verse 20, he says, he said, I will hide my face from them. I will see what will become of them, for they are a perverse generation, unfaithful children. Jesus uses those same two words, unfaithful and perverse. So these are both used to describe the generation that Jesus was addressing, of which his disciples were a part. And it appears that the disciples at this point reverted back to their generation, their culture, as they were dealing with this demon-possessed boy. It was a twisted culture because it was a faithless culture. I was just thinking this morning, I'm sorry, I was going to put that up for you to read along with me. Well, if you didn't get it the first time, it's there. I was thinking this morning, how is it in our present society that we could consider faithlessness or unbelief and perversity? And we could certainly go to what our culture is calling good, which is really evil. And I could give you a long list, and you know what those things are. But then I thought, what about within the church? And the first thing that occurred to my mind in thinking of what is faithless is really ironic. Because what occurred to me, that the most faithless movement that I could think of was the faith movement. I thought, wait a minute, how could something which is called faith, in which faith is emphasized so much, be faithless? It's because they look at faith as a power, not as something which has an object. They elevate faith. In fact, I've heard some of these faith teachers on a program talking among themselves and putting down the idea that faith has to have an object. And they said, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. I have no idea what that means. You just have faith. It doesn't have an object. It's just the power you have to declare what you want to be. That is faithless, because it's not faith in God. It's not trusting in God. It's trusting in yourself. That is faithless. I wish I could say it in stronger language, but that faithlessness within the Christian culture leads to a perversion which is not only unbiblical, but is blasphemous. Well, I'm going to get going here and not know where to stop. So, any comments?
Well, I think there's also another aspect just to think about, and that's how does the resurrection fit into this? And it's John is the verse that's coming to me. It says, if you abide in my words, my Father and I will send you a helper, which will be with you forever. The whole function of the Holy Spirit changed with the resurrection. Okay, for ones who believe in that resurrection,
Mm-hmm,
right? And that has not happened at this point yet.
mm-hmm,
So they're still working under their own power, even though they're walking with God, because he's right there with them. That helper, I think we don't look at as saying the one who guides us to his words and makes us understand. So just a little bit, just as a different thought, not as a.
and I think
That's
that
what just came to my mind.
yeah, that certainly is relevant to anyone outside of that inner circle. I think in order to give credit to Jesus's words here toward them, we have to say that although they may have been lacking in their dependence on the Holy Spirit, that at least it was available to them because of what he had given them before, because he had given them power. And certainly,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
certainly for anybody else, this is something that occurs later. I guess I would make that
Again, we
caveat.
bring time to look at God's and Jesus' frustration with us, and we know we have that, and we still.
Yeah.
Say, no, I'm gonna do it my way.
Right. Yeah.
Or I can't.
I think
Mhm.
as we look at this, you know, that's part of the point there, is their faithlessness was in their pride. Right? Their twist was that somehow now I can do this.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of reflecting what the Father says, your disciples couldn't do it.
Yeah, exactly. So somehow it was about them.
Mhm.
We're gonna do this now. And somehow it was, look at me, I'm gonna heal this, I'm gonna do this. And it wasn't working because it was totally about their pride. It was about them. It wasn't about Christ. It wasn't about dependence. It wasn't in humility. And that's the trip that is waiting for all of us. Is somehow
Mhm.
now we needed Christ when we got saved, but now we can kind of do everything on our own. We got the power. And what you're talking about is some of these faith teachers and these word of knowledge teachers or whatever they call themselves, and you just speak it into being and all this, and it's all about you and
Mhm.
no, it's all about Christ. And they somehow were making it about them.
Yeah. And we'll see that contrast after Jesus does heal the boy. All right, let's move on. We'll finish this verse. How long shall I be with you and put up with you? Jesus, I mean, Jesus is frustrated here. And is he frustrated just with the disciples who don't get it? Especially in view of his mindfulness of the approach of the suffering and death that he would be enduring. You know, he's thinking, look, I'm going to be going to the and suffer and die soon. You know, I don't need this aggravation. Or is it he's just come from the heavenly bliss of the previous night and made him homesick? Oh, I wish I could get out of here and go back to where I was. You know, humanly speaking, we could see that either of those would certainly be valid. But he's definitely frustrated and annoyed with his disciples. And so he says, bring your son here. So next we come to the divine power. While he was still approaching, the demon slammed him to the ground and threw him into a convulsion. The Christian Standard Version says the demon knocked him down and threw him into severe convulsions, right on cue as he's coming to Jesus. This is unlike what we often experience when we go to the doctor and we get there, the symptoms leave. You ever had that happen? Well, before I came, I had a pain right there. It's not there now. How on 1 to 10, how's your pain? Right now it's 0. You know, half hour ago it was a 10. What can I tell you? You know, in this case, the demonstration takes place, establishing the fact that the boy is demon possessed. The demon slammed him. That's a term often used of boxers giving knockout blows. Threw him into a convulsion. In a sermon entitled "The Devil's Last Throw," Spurgeon considered how the devil often strikes hard against a person just as they begin to come to the Savior. He says, I have seen men, just when they were beginning to hear and beginning to think, taken on a sudden with such violence of sin, and so fearfully carried away by it, that if I had not seen the same thing before, I should have despaired of them. But Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit and healed the boy and gave him back to his father. I want you to notice the 3 verbs that describe what Jesus did. First of all, he rebuked the demon, basically saying, stop what you're doing. Then he healed him by dispossessing the spirit, by casting the spirit out of the boy. And then lastly, gave him back to his father. Again, reminiscent of what happened back in Luke 7 when he gave the boy to his mother. That demonic spirit had snatched the boy from his father. And once Jesus healed him and rebuked the enemy, he gave the boy back to his father. That's what Jesus does. Now, this is the contrast between what, as Brian was pointing out, what was happening with the disciples. The people that were there, says they were all amazed. Notice this, at the greatness of God. They were amazed at the greatness or the majesty of God. The crowd recognized that this miracle took place from the authority of God. Dr. Thomas Constable points out that this sign should have convinced the crowd that Jesus was God. And this is the last of the 13 miracles that Luke describes in the Galilean section of his gospel. And there could be a break here after this. So the next part of the verse really could be the beginning of another section. And because that's a possibility here, that while everyone was marveling at all that he was doing, could refer to a more general description of what Jesus had been doing. We'll stop there, and since our time's up anyway, and continue next time with the failures of the disciples as Jesus ends his Galilean ministry. Any final comments or questions?
Paints a beautiful picture. The we hand God what's broken, and he takes it and hands it back to us.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Thank you. You're dismissed.
Go to your next class.
Hmm?
Go to your next class.
Yeah, give me your response.
I'll have to find it. I was telling them, so you-